So welcome back, everyone, to another session of our Ask the Editor series. I am so excited to be here today with two editors. We have Sara Clugage and Ariel Porte joining us from Dilettante Army. Welcome, guys. Thank you. How are you today?
Doing great.
Yeah,
awesome.
Doing really well.
So let's jump right in. Tell us about the origin of your magazine.
Sure. I'll start that. I started the magazine with our third editor, who unfortunately can't be here today, Christine Elliott. We told her we'd make a hand puppet of her that would naturally turn evil, as all puppets do. But the non-puppet, Christine Elliott, and I went to grad school together at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. And then we both moved to Brooklyn. We're good friends, and we started Dilettante Army in 2013. It launched in 2014. And we were looking, I think, to kind of revive the community we had in Chicago and in grad school, where you can have kind of casual conversations with other thinkers. And we were really missing that. So we wanted to create an online space where we could talk to each other, keep up the conversations we were used to, in a way that wasn't as formal as other publishing platforms. So no peer review, lots of jokes. So that was kind of the goal. And we ran Dilettante Army as kind of a running blog, like we continually published, until 2018, when we moved to a new format of themed issues that come out supposedly quarterly, but really quasi-quarterly now.
Mm-hmm. Great. Anything to add, Rebecca?
So I'm a relatively late addition, so this kind of account of the deep history of Dilettante Army mostly goes before my time, but I will say that it was such a wonderful ecosystem to join, having kind of seen it already thrive and flourish.
Mm-hmm. So can you talk about the name of the magazine? Because I was really excited to see that you're sort of reclaiming the word dilettante, because I'm someone who has always sort of thought of myself, I like to do visual art, I like to write nonfiction, fiction, and sometimes I feel like that's a bad thing. And I was really excited to see that you're sort of reclaiming on your site this idea of celebrating people who do many different things and have interests in different areas and can actually use that to their benefit in creating work.
Yeah. I mean, exactly what you said. All of the editors work between genres. So I make art, I write things, I edit, I wear a lot of hats. So, and we also came out of, Christine and I came out of a visual culture program, which is kind of in the same vein of like interdisciplinary studies, really kind of values that kind of cross-disciplinary knowledge that I think can seem shallow to people who are in more siloed disciplines, but is a really important form of knowledge, and the only way that ideas can transfer between disciplines in a really fruitful kind of pollination. And I think Rebecca would agree with that. I'll call you a generalist, even though Rebecca's like trained in literary theory. This is kind of where we're coming from. And I, at the time we were starting the magazine, I was doing a lot of research on a group called the Society of Dilettanti, which is a club established in London in 1732 that still exists, who were, I guess maybe you could call them antiquarians, were really kind of art historians avant la lettre. So I was interested in how you form new disciplines. Like what is, when you take that kind of cross-disciplinary knowledge and apply it to new ideas, what do you come up with? And in that scenario, everyone's an amateur because there are no professional jobs available in this field yet. So what does that kind of beginning stage look like? And also, practically coming out of grad school, I felt, and I was seeing my friends feel like we had all of this knowledge that we had gone to great trouble to acquire, and then no place to put it. So that's kind of the reality of both academia and journalism right now, that wages are stagnant, jobs are precarious, and only getting more so. So there's a real kind of, I'll just call it straight up Marxist element to that title.
Yeah, that's interesting because I think there's a lot of pressure on writers and artists to sort of choose a specific discipline and really hunker down and focus on it and become like an do your 10,000 hours or whatever and become an expert. But I like what you're saying because it actually makes me think that that's more of market pressure than something that maybe organically comes from the writer or the creator themselves. I think many writers would love to be able to explore different disciplines and, draw more from visual arts and poetry. And I think my screen keeps.
I think you're frozen, Becky.
Oh. Is it okay now?
Yeah.
I see my connection is a little unstable, but we'll soldier on. Just sort of saying that I think a lot of writers and artists and creators would like to be able to draw from many different disciplines, but it's sort of like we feel this market pressure, even when submitting to literary, you need to identify your work as poetry or fiction or nonfiction. And that seems more like a marketing thing than something that necessarily always comes from the writer.
Yeah. I think a lot of the kind of ethos of Dilettante Army is sort of in various ways, while acknowledging that we too are kind of involved, right, in the capitalist system, right, in a market, but finding ways to kind of get breathing room or to kind of push against those spaces which can really flatten out the cultural landscape, right? On the one hand, you need, in any kind of writing that pretends at having a community or building a community, you need some kind of generic cues so that people can at least know what they're pushing against, right? I mean, it's inviting in certain ways to kind of, acknowledge that there are these categories that we work within, and yet to say that more is possible, right? And to sort of expand the limits of what we can do. It's, I think a kind of part of the project too, not to be kind of, full on anti-discipline, right? Like things aren't bad just because they're disciplined, right? It's more that that when the landscape is kind of flattened out and reduced to sort of what fits neatly within a category, that the problem occurs, and it's hard, right? So Sarah's thought a lot about art and money, for instance, right? It's really hard to kind of separate out one's kinds of intellectual and aesthetic goals from the problem of how they're involved in a system that is very badly arranged and in which resources are really unequally distributed.
So to cover the basics, you guys publish critical theory, essays. I didn't see fiction, is that correct? as we just talked about disciplines and categories, but just to kind of give people a sense of what your magazine publishes. It's critical theory, essays, poetry, but not fiction. And not personal. I saw some like personal, like essays driven by personal experience, but they speak to some larger cultural or social or political idea. So not sort of like personal essays.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And this is really, I'll say, I think mainly about our capacity as editors and what we are, the kinds of work we're good at stewarding. But we publish, expository writing, critical essays. We also publish poetry. That's all Rebecca's job. And we don't publish fiction or short stories. It's just kind of one of the few boundaries we put on what we will and won't publish. We also publish some kind of like visual art. So we have slideshows, gifts, like commissioned visual artwork. And we do not publish personal essays, by which we mean like this happened to me kind of narratives. Just because we think there's a lot of that on the web already, and that's not a genre that needs our help. So, but we do, to qualify that, really appreciate critical work that takes into account the writer's own situatedness. So that's what we mean by like, we want essays that are grounded in lived experience a lot, because we want theory is no good if it never touches the ground, right? So you want it to kind of have some material and real world specificity, but to go beyond one person's story.
And I saw that there's a strong element of humor too, which I really appreciate, because I think some people who maybe don't have that much experience with critical theory might see the idea, might see feminism, Marxism, labor exploitation, and get very nervous. This is a very serious magazine. And there are plenty of fantastic, like Dissent comes to mind. There are plenty of fantastic, serious magazines that do take on those issues. But I think your magazine, what really jumped out at me is this element of playfulness, and you take these ideas seriously, but you're not, it's not a very heavy magazine.
That's great to hear. That's what we're going for. I mean, I want to hear what Rebecca has to say about that, because I think she's very smart about this issue. But I'll just say that we were looking to have more off the cuff conversations. That's maybe not quite accurate. We take our work really seriously. And we care about these issues, but that doesn't mean it needs to be a bummer all the time, like it's just, I think that humor is like an overlooked part of the life of the mind, which is something that we're trying to have here in community. So humor has been super important for us, and not something we see in kind of the community of lefty magazines that has arisen in, since post 2000. So certainly Dissent, N+1, New Left Review, Jacobin, like we all read those magazines, but we're looking to have something a little more feminist and a little funnier.
Yeah, and to show that humor and seriousness are not mutually exclusive. I mean, I think Sara says it really beautifully when she talks about, the sort of neglected quality of humor in the life of the mind. I mean, there is actually one type, to my knowledge, that is permitted, and it's the bitterest form of irony, right? I'm thinking of Adorno or somebody saying there is laughter because there is nothing to laugh about, which we are not opposed to that type of humor, which, has a real sort of cathartic function, I think, in the landscape. But also, there is something that seems a little almost regressive about denying the fact that even in the most kind of marginalized or oppressed lives, that there is room for play, that there is the capacity for humor, and that some of us are already living that, even as we live lives that are far from the ones that everyone deserves. So the bread is important, but also the roses, and humor, I think, is among the roses.
Yeah, I also, it seems like with humor too, you have a chance to be sort of stylistically innovative, which I was just sort of looking at the site and I got swept into this quiz that you guys put out so for people who haven't visited the site yet, there's their latest issue is called Mission Accomplished. And there's this kind of interactive quiz. I was really delighted to see that it was interactive, where you can learn about past political stunts by presidents and other politicians. And it was great. It was really fun. It was informative. And it was artful, it was very sleek in the way that it was designed. And I think that's also sort of speaks to something unique that you can do with an online magazine that you wouldn't be able to do with a print journal.
And all due credit to Christine Elliott, who is usually the coordinating editor behind the quiz feature, which we've had in several issues. That's an artist named Paul Swartz, who and Lena Chandak, I believe, also contributed to that entry. And that was a really, I thought, lovely way of taking what was a pretty bleak issue is about, in many ways, the aftermath and the fallout of 9/11, and sort of looking back on kind of the travesties of violence that and really kind of terrible policy that have occurred in the wake of that tragedy. And there was something about the way that those artists and Christine just brought brio, right, and lightness to the issue without at all kind of minimizing the seriousness of any of it that I felt was really tonally pretty wonderful.
Yeah, I think another thing I appreciated about it was that you poke fun at both sides, and I saw like even AOC gets a ribbing, which I think a lot of people, sometimes to my frustration, the left seems sort of reluctant to criticize their own. So it seems to me that your magazine is critical of power, political power, powerful institutions. The journal is sort of decidedly leftist. Seems to me, if you're talking about Marxism, labor exploitation, stuff like that, but you're also not afraid to criticize the Democrats or politicians that are meant to represent the left.
Yeah, I mean, Democrats deserve a good ribbing, as do we all, right? I think that's kind of, and my actually impression on the left is that we are all too ready to criticize each other. The left loves to eat itself. And so, ribbing AOC for the tax the rich dress, which I thought was an A+ political stunt, like full marks for me. That doesn't mean it's not funny. Like it is absolutely funny, and that's part of its appeal. And we had seen kind of Ocasio-Cortez go to the Met Ball and immediately face this backlash that what she was doing wasn't serious politics because it was material and because she's a woman, frankly. So but that was a great use of humor, I think, to do really serious work about politics. So yeah, we do come for all people in the best spirit of fun.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm curious what your take is on the Vita account, because I remember that when it came out in 2010, it was a big deal. And it sort of shook the literary publishing landscape. And I don't really, maybe I'm just more out of touch, but I don't really hear people talking about it that much anymore. And it was a very, at the time, it was a big deal to be like keeping track of the quote, how many women are being represented in literary magazines. And then now I just don't hear that much talk about it. I'm curious if you're paying attention to that, if it's what your opinion on that is.
We don't really pay attention.
Mhm.
I think, you know, the vast majority of people we publish are women or non-binary. And I think that's just because of our interest, because there aren't a whole lot of men in feminist studies. There should be more, obviously. But yeah, I think, and we also take a really, I think, careful and specific curatorial approach to who goes to who our contributors are. So we are not like wading through a vast slush pile. You know, we formulate these issue ideas. We think about who we want to write about those issues. And so our contributors, we find our contributors based on really specific needs and not so much on demographic profiles, although we certainly consider that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Sara gives a pretty accurate picture of sort of our thoughts about representation. I mean, it really honestly has not been too difficult, right? To find people coming from many different positions to write for us, which is why I think we regard with skepticism the kinds of excuses of larger publications that are like, well, we couldn't find anybody to write about X or Y, and our experience has largely been that that absolutely people exist who can write from all different kinds of places. I would say that we also, though, acknowledge that you know, our limits, I think, with humor, right? Like the kind of wonderful thing, right, about being a smaller publication is that you have a great deal of kind of control, right, about how you can choose to put out the thing that you want to put out into the world. And I think also we don't overestimate the idea that representation is all of the battle, or that we by ourselves can make a dent in it. That's a collective project, and it's one that has to be accompanied, I think, by other forms of change, right? It's, you know, otherwise you end up in the sort of tokenizing realm, which is something we've been very keen, I think, to avoid.
Yeah, that's what I was sort of getting at. I didn't mean your magazine specifically, but just sort of your views on how journals approach these ideas of greater equality. Like, it does seem like often the focus is on representation. A lot of people say, like, that's a great first start. Some people say that's meaningless. Some people say, you know, you have to start somewhere. And I think it's sort of a controversial issue. And so I was just curious if you had a take on that. I like what you were saying, Rebecca, about like how important it is to avoid tokenism. And so, you know, what you're after is a diversity of ideas, people who bring, you know, different perspectives to the table. Because there was something that honestly, like, always rubbed me the wrong way after the Vita count came out, which I greatly appreciated it. I thought it was hugely important. But also then there was like this mad rush to get all these women writers into journals. And there was something about it that felt just a little bit superficial, or I don't know. I mean, I think that it's obviously very important, but also there was just something that felt, I think it goes to what you were saying, Rebecca, about sort of not changing any underlying social conditions for women, right? Just providing more representation in the magazine. So I don't know. I was just wondering if you had like a take on it or a perspective on that.
So maybe I should let Sara go, but I mean, I'm not really a producer of takes per se. I'm just too slow for that. And I think that Dilettante Army accommodates that slowness, which is really lovely. But I will say that you know, to the extent that that the Vita count, which I agree is and was an important kind of way of showing ourselves to ourselves, right? In as much as the Vita count encourages people to think about their standards and to think about kind of what it is that that they think is worthy work to publish. I think it's good. I would not argue, as some people would, that is necessarily a lowering or a slackening of standards. In fact, I think it is just a kind of revisioning of what your standards are, and often it ends up being more stringent. I mean, I think you know, there is something to the idea that you know, that the bar kind of has to be higher when you are kind of looking for work that that gives you that kind of richness and diversity, right? And I don't understand why that should necessarily mean a lowering of standards. It is a widening of what one thought was possible, and it is, if you're lucky, a widening for your readers as well, right? So I think that, yeah, I mean, there are definitely you know, potentially really good things that can come out of that sort of sociological approach. I think the danger, again, is in a kind of reduction to sociology, right? To say like, oh, I've somehow, and this is familiar from many discourses, right, including sort of college admissions, right, way back at, you know, in the mid 20th century, right? The idea that one fills a quota, right, and so one is done. Right. And that is actually something that informs a lot of kind of hiring practices in a way that, you know, people of color, women end up or non-binary people or trans people end up getting hired places sometimes. It's still very hard to get hired. And then basically are treated like a diversity hire, right? Or there's no kind of infrastructure in place to help them succeed in the work, despite the fact that they are as qualified as anybody, as smart as anybody, as competent as anybody. So again, I go back to the idea, right, that that we need sort of these mirrors to reflect our grossest failings back at ourselves, but to mistake a reflection for a solution is pretty naive, I would say.
Yeah, nicely said. Sarah, anything to add?
I agree with everything Rebecca just said. I think we are really, you know, we're a small and slow moving boat, you know, so we are not going to, you know, we're not going to make the count any different on our own. We have, you know, upwards of 20 contributors a year. So it's not, we're not going to move any needles. We are really interested, I think, in engaging with ideas that make the world better for trans people, people of color, any number of other identity markers. And I think what's most important to me is that we engage with those ideas and those intellectual traditions with respect and responsibility. So we are not rushing to do anything, for sure. We are not in the business of hot takes. And we want to build relationships. And, you know, the reason we, I'll speak for Rebecca here, guardedly, that the reason we want to do this magazine is to work with writers who are engaged with these ideas, and that's how part of how we engage as well. So this is for all of our benefit in the community, including our own, to work with people who have ideas we are interested in, regardless of their, not regardless. Representation does matter, I think, but it is a small slice of the pie.
Yeah. And as you said, Sarah, the things that we gravitate towards, topically speaking, actually make it very, very easy, right, to get a lot of different voices in the room, if I may say. And, you know, to the point about kind of the slow boat, which I love as an image of what we are doing. I mean, it also gives us the kind of latitude to produce issues. Our issues are themed, as Sarah has said, to produce issues that that while they are kind of connected to our present moment, are sort of maybe built to last, right? Like that we would like to imagine people not just kind of saying like, okay, you know, this isn't something that I ever want to go back to, but saying maybe I could, you know, go back to some of these essays or some of these poems and read them again. That idea, not that there's anything wrong, by the way, with the zeitgeisty or the topical, right? I mean, that's great too, but I think that we are after something that, in as much as it's possible, kind of in the sort of hyper fast world of the internet, like something that's built to last a little longer. And it sort of splits the difference, right, between, say, the kind of slow boat that is a print journal and the kind of alacrity of say, like, whatever's trending on Twitter that day. If we planned an issue that was going to come out in like 4 months around some of these kinds of really intense but swift moving bits of the cultural register now, then that would be a lot harder. It would be a lot harder to get people to care about it when the issue finally came out.
And how do you guys find your writers? It sounds like there's a mix of soliciting work from people you admire and then also stuff that comes in through the slush pile.
Yeah, that's right. So the way our process works, and I like that, Rebecca, we do kind of split the difference between a print magazine and like BuzzFeed, So we formulate an idea. We always have a few ideas kicking around, and Christine and Rebecca and I will meet and kind of flesh out what we want for a certain issue. And then we start to try to commission. So we'll send emails to people we know who are writing on X topic, and some cold emails to people we just admire and would love if they would write for, as small and slow a boat as Dilettante Army. And sometimes it works out, which is wonderful. And we always leave some space for the open call. So we formulate an open call with some paragraphs about what our issue is going to be, and some topics we think would be interesting. We publish that on the website and then send out a newsletter, and we post it on social media. And there's like maybe a 2-week period where we're accepting open submissions. We're in one of those now. Our call is open for our next issue, which will be called A Spectre is Haunting. And those are due on December 7th. If anybody wants to, is watching this recording and wants to submit. So we save some pieces for the open call, and we have a pretty flexible format, right? Because we're not working with page numbers. So we'll have anything from 5 to 8 submissions in an issue, depending on what fits the needs of the issue, and how much good stuff we get.
And do you work with writers?
Yeah, so we, the kind of process, nuts and bolts of it, is that once we have an agreement with a writer, they have like 6 to 8 weeks to write their essay or make their photo essay or whatever, write their poem, whatever they're doing, which is maybe long by like Condé Nast standards, but like very fast for an academic journal. So we're kind of like splitting the difference there too. And then they turn in a rough draft, and they will work with one of us as editors, and sometimes with more than one of us, depending on whose input is needed, for over a long period, like a month. And editing can go any number of ways. Sometimes the first copy is pristine, and sometimes it can take like up to maybe 3 or 4 rounds of edits. And we do like to work with both established and emerging writers too. So that's part of, I think, our remit is to provide editorial services for people who maybe haven't worked with an editor before or who are just getting started, and to position them alongside, veterans in the game. And during that editorial period, we have also commissioned an artist who is going to make an image of each person's contribution to the issue. So that artist gets the rough draft that the contributor turns into us and works from it to create a picture that's going to be in the issue.
Nice. And you mentioned academic journals, but I don't, the work that you guys published did not strike me as particularly, in fact, it seemed decidedly non-academic, right? So is there, how would you, if somebody's watching this video and they're like, this sounds right up my alley, how would you sort of describe the kind of tone you're looking for, or the kind of energy you're looking for in a piece?
So I can start. I know Sarah will have a lot of thoughts on this, and say that there is a really broad range in terms of the amount, for instance, of formal academic apparatus that people turn in, right? So we've had things that are sort of scholarship or critical theory proper that are heavily footnoted and that are cited and really kind of very, very closely involved with the sort of processes of rigor that characterize scholarship. And we also have things that take a different route. And I think what unites these things, the things that kind of are a little more sort of lyrical or personal, with those that are kind of, would not be out of place, perhaps, citationally speaking, in an academic journal, is all about style for me, at least, right? So the quality of ideas has to be there no matter what we do. But also we are really keen on the idea that the masses, so to speak, right, of whom we are some, the masses can handle a lot. And they deserve what they can handle, right? They deserve something with intellectual breadth and depth, and also something that cares about the reading experience, right? That cares about really communicating itself and communicating itself in a way that is not merely directed towards complex and sometimes very insidery scholarly debates, but that can actually sort of bring those debates and those insights and those arguments out into the world of the general reader. And I think we're always kind of refining our idea, right, about what the general reader really is. And I think that actually is something that's been a great privilege, especially in kind of developing these close collaborative editorial relationships with contributors, is really getting to sort of rethink every time, right? Like, who is reading this, and what is going to delight them, and what is going to infuriate them, and what is going to challenge them, and what is going to sort of make them laugh, right? And I think that that kind of attention to writing as a form of speaking to an audience, right, as a form of theater in a certain sense, is really something that is a value of the magazine.
Do you guys have a sense of your readership?
We don't track data to a large extent, and that's because, well, I think one, we can't really be bothered, and two, I am very keen on privacy for website users. So there are you can sign up for the newsletter, and that will that's the only way you would find out about Dilettante Army, really. And the site uses a couple cookies for that newsletter sign up, but otherwise it's anonymous. And because we don't market Dilettante Army at all, that works out okay for us. I would say that in terms of audience, I think we are trying to speak to people like us who are maybe academically trained, maybe not, but really interested in ideas. And I think I've learned a lot from Rebecca about how to speak about that. That people, the gambit of Dilettante Army is that people want to be challenged. Like they want interesting and difficult ideas. And we are certainly quite interested in those ourselves. The one thing that we do not tolerate, though, is jargon. So we try to maintain this kind of what I call a translational position, to take academic debates and discourses and make them hopefully accessible to someone who has not been trained in that one discourse. And so this is not really, and that's part of kind of the dilettante ethos too, that you are taking something from one place and moving it to another and trying to explain to the people there what's happening over back yonder. And since it is impossible for all of us to gain all of the specialized knowledges available out in the world, we think that's a pretty valuable service.
Yeah, co-signed.
Can you go back? So you don't market the magazine. That's interesting. Is that a choice or is that just too much on your plate?
It's both, really. If I were more on the ball, I would certainly we would certainly be better on social media than we are. But I think in the beginning, when I started Dilettante Army, I didn't know how it would go. Like I was open to having advertising on the site. Maybe we would have a subscription model. I didn't know. And I think the longer we did it, the more it became clear that none of those things were what we wanted. So there's no advertising on Dilettante Army. It's all privately funded. I put my own money into it. We have a couple donors. But it's not very expensive to run. And all of us editors are volunteers. So it really just, the money we have goes towards paying contributors and hosting and website support. So it's a pretty, it's like a small, sleek boat, but also very slow moving. I'm going to pound that metaphor out. But yeah, so we don't really market it and because we don't need to. And that really, as Rebecca said previously, it gives us a lot of control and a lot of flexibility so that we can treat this as a kind of a curatorial project more than like a fully functioning magazine that needs to support itself financially.
So you don't need to. So it's sort of like if you know, you know. Is that kind of the ethos? Like if you know about this journal, you know about it. And
Go ahead, I mean, I think, in its way, I mean, I think that we've also kind of seen, especially in recent issues, the real power of kind of word of mouth in certain ways. I mean, I've noticed submissions going up quite a lot in volume in the past year. So I don't know if Sarah would believe that as well, but yeah. Also just the kind of I mean, I think the ambition here, right, is not necessarily to kind of, there's no profit motive, right? So the ambition here is not necessarily to find the widest readership and then pander, which is the very cynical play of many very large publications. It's rather, I think, to say like this is available to anyone who wants it and to find the people who want it, right? And we've had astonishing luck with that so far. And, all the while avoiding kind of other sorts of things, right? That like a comment section, right? Which is one way to increase your readership substantially, but at the same time is not something that that any of us has time to kind of monitor or curate. And so we prefer to focus on the work itself. So I don't know. I mean, I think Sarah might have interesting ideas about this, but for my part, I'm happy to kind of find the ones by whom we want to be recognized, and to kind of focus our efforts there. And for that, I don't know necessarily that marketing is even the right the right strategy, right? There are kind of other ways to do that. And it's astonishing privilege, right? To be able to kind of be free of that need to just kind of put something out as quickly as possible, and, you know, and to reach as many people as possible. There are things, you know, that can be a good in some cases, but I think that we're just a very different kind of editorial staff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll add to that I mean, part of this consideration, just very practical, like all of us have other jobs, you know, and I don't think Dilettante Army as the project is framed now would be supportable as a full-time occupation for any of us. And that's because they're just, when you market, what are you marketing? You're marketing like long, difficult writing that, you know, we're just not going to find, I think, a mass market for that. And certainly in the like social media stuff that we do, we don't see a lot of turnover between, you know, kind of grabbing Instagram posts and actually reading, you know, a 4,000 word essay on Hegel. So it's not, I don't think that's going to happen. And I think it's maybe the wrong tree to bark up. That said, like, we love it when people find us. We're not trying to like be a secret, right? And it's wonderful whenever, you know, we've recently had some writers with like very substantial Twitter followings, like Sarah Jaffe or Daniel Lavery, and those kind of audiences coming to Dilettante Army are delightful to us.
Yeah, our secrecy, if there's any, is entirely accidental, or entirely, you know, just
I think I was wondering, because I saw
practice.
Somebody said on Twitter that it was like the best kept secret or something like that.
Yeah, that was Rebecca.
That might have been me.
Okay,
that might have been me. Which, you know, I don't know, if that becomes the marketing meme, that would be hilarious.
It could work in your favor, right? Very mysterious and enticing.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I do sort of think of us as the kind of you know, an artist book in a certain way. Like each issue is a sort of artist's book, and you know, as far as accessibility goes, maybe has a leg up on the artist's book, because you know, it might be one of a kind, but lots of people can read it and interact with us, and, you know, send us submissions, which we hope people will do. And yeah, I mean, you know, it really has felt like you know, we've had issues that are about kind of the question of community, for instance, and one of the kinds of goals of Dilettante Army really is a sort of community building, and we've also, you know, we had debates, right, in the kind of course of bringing the community issue together, or like kind of thinking through some of the issues of community, and thinking about how, and I'm thinking of an issue called clubs, right? But in the clubs issue, right, one of the questions is, you know, a community by nature is kind of, you know, built of its exclusions, right? It's for some people and it's not for other people. And we've thought a lot about kind of the politics of that, and what kind of community are we building here, and how do we signal, you know, who it is that we want. And we know that a great many people will be indifferent to what we do, and a great many people will be, you know, those who have problems with, you know, people on the left, or those who have problems with you know, feminists, right? You know, these other things, you know, that those people are likely going to be, would not like such a thing, right? So the idea really, I think, has been, you know, in part kind of, you know, identifying your audience, but also identifying who are the people, you know, who are likely to maybe want to stay a little while. And I think we have those among both our readers and among those who write for us. So that's been really, really lucky.
It's really interesting because as somebody personally who's very fond of projects and side projects and side projects to my side projects, I find the need to market and the need for the project to grow is purely selfish, because I feel like I can't sustain my interest in it if it's not growing and if I don't feel like I'm reaching a new audience. But it sounds like you guys actually are growing in a way that's satisfying and still motivates you to want to work on it when you have all these other like demands. But it's not like an intentional, marketing campaign.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's growing at a pace that I find satisfying, that I really think that people have found us who have stuck around. We are building a community of sorts. And also I'm thinking about the club's issue too. And I think that Dilettante Army is a source of support for communities that are maybe tangential to ours. I'm thinking about Kelly Britt's essay on the United Order of Tents, this Black fraternal organization with a clubhouse in need of revival in Brooklyn here. And that essay has become like a citable scholarly publication on this organization, about which very little has been written. So that's, United Order of Tents has a website now, and this essay is linked on it. Kelly can use that for her further grant applications. And so that kind of supporting other people's scholarship, giving them a platform and a little bit of money to do their work, is something that's really important to me. Like Dilettante Army is about supporting a community of scholars, artists, and writers.
Mm-hmm. And what do you both do besides edit the journal?
Do you want to go or?
Okay,
all right. So I'm a member of the core faculty at a sort of grad school for the masses began in Brooklyn, now is kind of all over the world, called the Brooklyn Institute for Social Research. Our game is kind of radically accessible courses in what we often call the social arts, but the liberal arts and social sciences. So we teach everything from political theory to canonical and non-canonical literature, to trans and queer and feminist theory. There's a number of different kinds of entry points into that curriculum. But the idea is that it's core for our time, right? A core curriculum for our time, and the kind of definition that we have of that is always growing and changing. I mean, it's one of the reasons it's how I met Sara, and it's one of the reasons that I was so attracted to the Dilettante Army project, is because I think that we share the aim, both Dilettante Army and Brooklyn Institute, of really kind of, building some sort of platform, building some sort of way of speaking to one another that involves a kind of radical openness and a dedication to the idea that people deserve to have a stake in the life of the mind and the ideas that are important to us right now, and also that people deserve and can handle a lot of rigor. And a lot of pleasure, right? There's a pleasure in intellection that doesn't get talked about nearly enough. Humor, I think, as Sara said earlier, but also pleasure. So that's me, and I'm also at work on a book about Paradise, Arcadia, and the Golden Age.
Oh wow!
So, yeah,
cool.
It's a really good book. Very exciting. As for me, I am also core faculty somewhere else for a graduate program, MMA in critical craft studies at Warren Wilson College. I'm trained as a weaver, and craft studies is kind of my home discipline, although I stray a lot. And I also do a lot of work with Wikipedia on knowledge access, especially with an organization I'm an organizer with, Art and Feminism, which works on gender and the arts on Wikipedia and Wikimedia projects and out in the world. So those are my stakes. I also make a lot of work these days about food, and I've done a series of salon dinners that it's kind of half under the umbrella of Dilettante Army. Rebecca's spoken at one of them, at least, right? One, yeah. So those are kind of the other wheelhouses I run in.
So Wikipedia, sorry, can you say more about, I didn't realize they had, is this you're working for Wikipedia or you're working for a different organization?
I work with two really organizations, with Art and Feminism and with Wikimedia NYC, which is my home chapter. Yeah, all Wikipedia editors are volunteers. So it's not paid work, and I don't work for the Wikimedia Foundation, which is the like kind of hosting and general body that enables Wikipedia. But yeah, there are a lot of, because all Wikipedia editors are volunteers, there are lots of gaps in who's available to take a lot of time to write stuff for free. So the work I do centers on kind of those overlooked areas on gender in the arts.
I see. Cool. And Sarah, can you also tell us about your earrings? Because I saw something on Twitter about the importance of your earrings. So now I have to ask.
I mean, I'm so delighted. I feel like I had this one line to Rebecca, I don't know, like a year or 2 years ago. And I'm delighted that she remembers that it landed that well. That I had like earrings that kind of make a face if you look at them long enough. And I said, at the time, that all of your earrings should also be jokes, because why not? Like they're right next to your mouth. That's an opportunity for a good line, right?
Right.
And I did, because of that, I wore, these are, I don't know if you can see that. They say craft haunted.
Yeah. Oh, do they both say craft, or one says
it says craft and haunted?
Oh, nice. Okay.
And I made these on a laser cutter. It's I'm wearing them in deference to our upcoming issue.
Right.
It's a line from a Roberta Smith review of a show at the Museum of Art and Design, where she said the institution was craft haunted. And that's the delight of a specter is haunting. The line is the opening line of the Communist Manifesto, a specter is haunting Europe, the specter of communism. Right. And it's just like it's a great line. It comes up all over the place. A specter can haunt anything, turns out. So we're excited about the new issue, and just thinking, if all your earrings should be jokes, right, all your jokes should also be magazines.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you guys so much. So let's tell our viewers what's on the horizon. You guys have a call for submissions now on the theme of A Spectre is Haunting, and that runs till very soon, till December 7th. So just a few more days for people to get that work in. And then will you have another opening for people to submit work?
We will. It will be sometime in the spring. Probably early March.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, great. And people can find you on Twitter, but secretly. Very
secretly. We don't have much of a Twitter presence, but we are there, and we enjoy it. Please come find us on Twitter at Dilettante Army.
Please do.
Great.
And the website is dilettantearmy.com.
Okay, great. Well, thank you guys so much. This was really interesting.
Thank you so much, Becky. It's a pleasure.